If you haven't gone through the Dungeon Master's Guide in a while, there's actually some pretty decent gems in there, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about my top 5 variant or optional rules that you probably haven't heard about or have long forgotten about that you may want to check out for your games. If it's not the case, go ahead and let me know if you did actually know of all of these that I'm about to mention, but I'll be surprised as there's quite a few in this that I don't hear people talk about very often. The first on my list is hero points. I use hero points constantly in my games, though I use them slightly differently than it's presented in the book. Hero points work pretty similarly to Bardic Inspiration, where after you roll a d20 check, but before the results are determined, you can use a hero point to roll an additional d6 to that roll, possibly turning a failure into a success, but you can only use 1 hero point per check. Now, it recommends giving people a set amount of hero points per level, so generally 5 plus the character level, and they reset each time that they level up. I use them instead of inspiration, so when people do cool stuff, I will give them out at that point. I usually start off the session by giving everyone 1 hero point, and then they'll get additional hero points by doing heroic things, but they do expire at the end of the session. The next rule on my list might help simplify the game a bit, and that is ability proficiencies. So you can completely do away with skill proficiencies and swap them to this variant rule. So what this means is you have proficiency with any skill or task associated to a particular ability, and it gives advice for what ability proficiency should go to each character. One should be determined from the class of the character, and the other should be determined from the character's background. This might be a nice variant rule to use if you want to keep things simple and not have to deal with a whole bunch of skills. So if you have a new player, instead of asking for a performance check, you could just ask for charisma. Instead of stealth, it's just dexterity or whatever the ability score associated with that is. And it might make the game seem a little less daunting or scary for newer players. And since we're already on the topic of proficiencies, that brings me nicely into my next optional rule. This one I wouldn't really consider if I was playing in person, but as I play mostly online, I may give this one a go. Instead of using a proficiency bonus, which is just a set number, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on your level, this method uses a proficiency die, which you can set to have it auto roll in something like Foundry. So you can go up to here where it says proficiency variant and change it from the default using the player handbook method and switch it to the DMG variant with the die method. And if you're already in here, you may look at using the other variant rule, which is rest variant. There are 2 variant rest rule options, one being heroic, which basically switches your long rest to only needing to take an hour and your short rest only take 5 minutes. So your players can rest up a lot and will be super strong. It gives additional guidance as to how to not make spellcasters like crazy overpowered, but honestly, everything's going to be pretty overpowered with this method. This is a great method if you want really hard fights all of the time and you want your players to feel like heroes. The other method is quite the opposite, and it is gritty realism, which means that a short rest is going to take a full 8 hours rest or a night's sleep, and a long rest will take a week. This method sounds absolutely insane, and you definitely want to get your players' buy-in before using it. But it's not that crazy. Your world will definitely be a bit more deadly with this because there's not going to be any healing during the course of an adventure, and they will likely need to bring more health potions and things like that with them on their adventures. And on that note of healing, there's another optional rule that you can use where you are required to expend a use of your healer's kit whenever you bandage yourself up or treat your wounds. So you couldn't even heal from a short rest unless you use one of your healer's kits. Some honorable mentions: if you play in person and you want to speed up gameplay a bit, or initiative specifically, you could use an optional rule of just taking a flat initiative score, which is 10 plus your dex modifier. No rolling, you automatically know who's going in what order. If you're playing online though, and you want to mix things up a little bit, you could set things to re-roll initiative at the top of every round, and that just keeps things a little more exciting. People don't necessarily know exactly when their next turn is going to be. Now, on to my last variant rule that I want to talk about. It's going to be spell points. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard about spell points, but I am sure there are a lot of you that have never heard of spell points before. So let's take a look at them. Basically, instead of having spell slots, and especially for newer players, spell slots can be a little bit confusing, you have spell points which work essentially like a mana pool, and different spells cost different amounts of points. So showing the chart here, this is how much it costs to cast each leveled spell. Though, just because you have enough points to be able to cast a spell of a certain level does not mean you can learn it. So you are still bound by some of those normal level restrictions. You can look at this chart here and you can see how many points you would have for the various levels and what the max level spell you could cast cast at that level. This gives spellcasters a lot more flexibility, but as they're already pretty strong, especially in the late game, I would nerf this a little bit to keep things a little bit more in check. One of the first things that I would do, if you look at how many spell points they have per level, let's flatten this curve a bit. So instead of going from 4 to 6 to then 14, I would probably have it go from 4 to 9 to 14, and just kind of do that same thing all the way down the line. That way spellcasters get a bit more of an even level progression. Then pretty much every spell of 4th level and up, I would increase the cost. Let them cast a ton of lower level spells, but if they want to cast higher level spells, it's gonna dip into their, essentially their mana pool. By default, this system also limits the number of 6th level spells and above they can use per day. I would remove this restriction and again, just make higher level spells cost more. 9th level spells, for example, might cost something like 35 or even 50 points to be able to cast, depending on how much magic or how strong you want magic to be in your world. But that's just me. That's how I would go about it. Obviously, talk to your players before you make any of these changes because you'd really hate to have them caught off guard and feel like their characters are now useless. If you made it this far, let me know any variant rules that I left out that you think should have been included in this list, or let me know what some of your favorite variant rules are that you like to use in your game. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.